For as long as people have recorded history, the ocean and deep bodies of water have always held a mystery about them. Deep pools of water that humans visit on vacation, admire, and swim in, whose depths are obscured into pitch blackness once we leave the shore, and hold within them countless other living beings, watching, lurking, waiting. A few non-living beings as well, as where anything can live, so too must they eventually die. One lake in the United States shares the same picturesque scenery as most others with the state of Georgia, encouraging them to go and visit, boasting its 690 miles of shoreline, aqua blue colored water, and multiple purposes for flood protection, power production, water supply, and fish and wildlife management. But what those travel brochures and websites don't bring up are the towns and communities that were destroyed to bring the lake to life. Sit back and relax as we explore the dark history of Lake Sidney Lanier. Hello everyone and welcome to Wicked Encounters, where we explore just what goes bump in the night. I'm your host Allie, and today we're going to talk about Lake Sidney Lanier, Lake Lanier for short. Lake Lanier is a reservoir in the northern part of Georgia that was created by the completion of Buford Dam on the Chattahoochee River in 1956. The lake was built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the purpose of flood control and water supplies for Atlanta, though it does have quite a few other purposes, such as power production and fish and wildlife management. It's also a bustling tourist attraction, with over 7.5 million people visiting every year. The lake was named after Confederate poet Sidney Lanier, who wrote the poem Song of the Chattahoochee as an ode to the river that feeds it. A contentious decision, as many local officials wanted it named after politicians, but in the end, the poet won, which may be for the best. Politics muddles everything, though with the history of the lake, its name was far from the most controversial. Before the land became a lake, it was once part of the Cherokee Nation, until the U.S. government expelled most of its members from what would be one of the most southern points of the Trail of Tears in the 1830s. It wasn't the only forced removal of a community in that area. Roughly 1,100 African Americans owned land and operated businesses in Forsyth County, specifically in a village called Oscarville, which quickly changed after September 1912. That fall was horrible. Like putting a timeline of events is just one bad thing, one-upping the last. On September 5th, Ellen Grice, a 22-year-old white resident, claimed a black man entered her home at night and attacked her while her husband was away. When her husband returned, he gathered a group of men who began searching for the man who attempted to assault Grice. They captured Tony Howell and brought him to the county sheriff, Bill Reed, who arrested Howell as well as 4 others as accomplices, who were all black. On September 7th, as white residents learned of the arrest of 5 black men, they formed a mob at the jailhouse in an attempt to lynch them. Hearing of the mob, a local black preacher, Reverend Grant Smith, went to the jail and made a few comments to the crowd, with one being that Grice is a sorry white woman. The mob, which was now made up of a few hundred angry white people, turned their attention to the Reverend and brutally beat him until Sheriff Reed and Deputy Loomis intervened and sheltered him. At the same time, many in the black community of Cummings were having an annual barbecue. When they learned that the men had been arrested and Reverend Smith was beaten by a mob, men from the barbecue began to make their way to the town center. When they arrived, they were greeted by about 500 armed white residents waiting for them under the rumored belief that their movement was to plant dynamite in the town. Mayor Charlie Harris attempted to have the mob disperse, but they refused until the Georgia Governor Joseph Brown sent the Georgia National Guard to break up the crowd. It doesn't end there. The following day, a white resident of Oscarville, 18-year-old May Crow, went missing after visiting her aunt, and a search party began looking for her. The following day, she was found in the woods, unconscious but alive, with her throat slashed and having been sexually assaulted. A pocket mirror had been found in the woods, and while it's not specified how close it was to the crime scene, a prominent community member saw a group of black teenagers gathered nearby a church to see what was going on. Among them included 17-year-old Ernest Knox, who recently moved to the area, and was one of about 31 black residents. The community member asked if one of them owned the mirror, which Knox said he did. The questions began to intensify, and it led to Knox being coerced into saying he attacked May Crow. This resulted in Knox being arrested for the attack, along with his 18-year-old cousin Oscar Daniel, his other cousin 21-year-old Trucy Daniel, and her husband 24-year-old Robert Edwards, under the assumption that they were accomplices during the attack on September 10th. Edward wouldn't last the night. Edwards was a large man, and after hearing of his arrest, at least 2,000 white men swarmed the small jail, broke in, and dragged Edwards outside. Edwards was lynched from a telephone pole in the downtown area, and his lifeless body was shot repeatedly until it was riddled with bullets. The mob wasn't content, and white residents began terrorizing black families of Forsyth County with threats of arson to force them to leave, which they did in droves. May Crow died from her injuries without ever regaining consciousness to implicate anyone in her attack, resulting in the hanging of Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel on October 25th. Oscar Daniel maintained his innocence all throughout the trial, but in the end it mattered little. By the end of 1912, hardly any of Forsyth County's black population remained in the area. Now you may be asking yourself, Allie, why are you going on and on about black people's plight in Georgia? I came here for the spooky scaries and haunted ghosties. And we're getting there, I promise you. You can skip to here if you're really uninterested about people's plights, though that's not exactly cool of you, but the reason is twofold. One is because it's super fucked up that an entire county went postal and drove out an entire community, simply because of their race. And two, because where there is a buildup of negative emotions, actions, and death, including those who have been killed unjustly, you will get the bad hauntings. And don't worry, we have plenty of those coming up. In order to construct the lake, the valley full of communities needed to be vacated, and as it stood, the land was lush and fertile, with many thriving communities and farms. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers wanted to create a lake to provide Atlanta and a few of the surrounding counties with power and water. To do that, they received $1 billion from Congress in 1946, which is about $10 billion today. 40% would be used to buy up the land, while the rest would be used on construction. For many locals, it was hard to put a price on the land they and generations of their families had lived on, but the government assured them that they were being paid fairly for the value of the land and buildings. And I mean, when has the government ever lied to us? In the end, though, roughly 700 families sold a total of 56,000 acres to the government, and the Buford Dam was constructed on the Chattahoochee River in 1956. Some families regretted their decision later on when they realized they couldn't survive on what the government gave them, but the deed was done. Their homes were gone. To prepare for the flooding waters, trees were uprooted and hauled away, along with barns and other wooden structures that could float and potentially endanger watercrafts. An auto racing track near Gainesville was left behind, but its bleachers were removed in case they decided to float up to the surface. Underwater racing, anyone? With some of the car accidents we're going to go over, maybe that joke was in poor taste. There were 20 cemeteries located on the land Lake Lanier now occupies, and while some graves were identified and moved, many were not able to, with the Army Corps having a very tight deadline to get things going. And so they did, in 1956, with locals jamming the roads and bridges to watch history vanish before their very eyes as the waters began to rise. And after a few years, nothing remained above water of what was once towns, villages, farms, communities, anything. Over the decades, when the lake's water levels dropped due to droughts, submerged roads, tire parts, and other artifacts have been exposed or brought to the water's surface. But divers have seen much creepier things that remain under the water than some old baubles and car parts. Divers have reported seeing catfish as large as a Volkswagen, and plenty of videos exist of someone showing a sunken houseboat, remains of a home, and other sightings of the ghost town beneath the lake. Though sometimes they find worse things. Sometimes they find body parts that have come up from the ground, reaching out to find an arm or a leg, without knowing where its owner might have floated off to. The lake has taken more bodies besides the ones left when it was created. Since its creation, it is estimated that 700 people have died, nearly 30% higher than the national average. Now, part of that is definitely due to the sheer number of visitors that go to the lake on the regular, but there are other theories for this. As discussed, the black community of Forsyth County had been ran out by angry mobs after the lynching of Robert Edwards and hangings of Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniels. On top of the many unmarked graves and remaining bodies, it is believed that the high number of deaths is due to the vengeful ghosts of the wronged and ancestors of the families who left pulling people down into the deep, murky depths of the lake. 250 families lived in Oscarville who were forced to leave, and it is thought that there is an aura of resentment that hovers over the underwater ghost town, where church bells are said to ring out from time to time. Now, it's not possible for actual church bells to be ringing under the water. Churches wouldn't have been left behind, due to their height, as well as the whole wooden structure things being removed, but that's never stopped ghosts from finding a way to make themselves be heard by the living. Perhaps one of the most popular, based on real events, ghost stories for the lake is called The Lady of the Lake. In 1958, Dahlia Mae Parker Young and her friend Susie Roberts were driving to the local Three Gables Roadhouse in Dawsonville. Their last sighting, alive, would be at a gas station they sped out of without paying. They'd never make it home. Over the months that followed, drivers claimed to have seen Dahlia Parker Young along State Route 53 after she had vanished, appearing as a ghostly, handless apparition, dressed in a blue dress, sauntering her way down the highway, appearing to be lost and searching for something that she would never find. 18 months later, local fishermen would spot the decomposing body of a woman beneath a bridge, bloated from water and missing 2 toes from its left foot and both of its hands. The body couldn't be identified by the coroners, but the locals near Dawsonville already had an idea on who it was. Dahlia became a legend, a rite of passage for teenagers and thrill seekers to find the Lady of the Lake, while Susie Roberts was all but forgotten. Well, until November 1990, when the wear and tear to the Jerry D. Jackson Bridge, where the bloated body was discovered, had caught up to it. As work began to expand and refit the bridge, construction workers would make a startling discovery. Filled with mud and half buried on the lake's bottom lied the twisted wreckage of a 1954 Ford, and inside were the bones of Susie Roberts. After 34 years of being missing, Susie Roberts was identified by her dental records, and the Dawsonville locals had confirmation that the unidentified woman from years ago was in fact Dahlia Parker Young. The young girls weren't the only ones to have a horrible car accident that ended with the lake taking them. Christmas Day of 1964 is known as the deadliest day in the history of Lake Lanier. Members of 2 Gainesville families, Mr. and Mrs. Johnny Brown and their 4 children, along with Mr. and Mrs. Billy Rogers with their children, were on their way to an orchard to pick apples for Christmas dinner when their station wagon crashed down a 30-foot embankment and plunged into the lake. A passerby and divers from the fire department jumped into the cold water to find the families, but with visibility almost at 0, it was nearly impossible to find them. In the end, only one of the Brown children out of the entire family survived, while Mr. and Mrs. Billy Roger lost 2 of their children to the tragic accident. Not all accidents are car-related, though. Boating is notoriously dangerous at the lake, especially during the summer months thanks to the number of visitors that increase. In 2010, a group of teenagers drowned after their boat capsized, and in 1994, 6 students drowned while attending a party on the lake. On June 17, 2012, a fishing boat crashed into a pontoon, killing 2 boys, and in July of the same year, Kyle Glover, the son of Tamika Foster and Usher, died when he was struck by a personal watercraft while just sitting on an inner tube. The number of boat fires that happen on the lake is surprisingly high as well, with 5 occurring between May 2021 and July 2022, and a fire breaking out on July 11, 2022. It's hard not to find so many tragic situations as being a bit supernatural in nature, but perhaps one of the most haunting was the disappearance of Kelly Nash on November 5th, 2015. His girlfriend Jessica Sexton informed the police that Nash had woken up at 4 a.m. that morning in their home, coughing, sneezing, and generally feeling unwell. Thinking it might have just been a normal sickness, she fell back asleep, but when she woke up a few hours later, Nash was gone. His truck, wallet, and cell phone were all left behind, with the only thing missing from their home being a 9mm handgun. A $50,000 reward was offered for anyone who could find Nash, but the only evidence they ever found was a surveillance video from a local gas station, recorded the night before his disappearance, where Nash picked up a few items while on the phone with Sexton. Over a month later, on February 8th, a fisherman found Nash's body in Lake Lanier, wearing the same pajama pants and shirt he had worn in the surveillance video. Authorities discovered a gunshot wound on his body, but his death was ruled as a drowning. Lake Lanier's history is full of stories as dark and murky as its waters. With so many deaths caused by accidents, drownings, unexplainable sicknesses, and a land coated in a thick layer of cruelty, it isn't hard to picture the lake as being one of the most haunted locations in the United States. But what do you think? Do you think the lake could be haunted, or could it just be that large gatherings of people make the chances for something abnormal to occur even larger? Would you dive in and see the underwater remains of the towns long lost in its depths? How about the Lady of the Lake? Would you chance a ghostly encounter to see her? Let me know in the comments. I read them all for future video ideas and to see how many other wonderful people enjoy the supernatural side of life. If you want to see what I release in the future, consider subscribing, liking this video, and sharing it with others who like spooky stuff. If you'd like to support me in other ways, consider checking out my Patreon or maybe joining my Discord, where we can chat about potential topics to be covered. Many of my videos are thanks to suggestions given to me, so feel free to let me know what you'd like to see covered next time. With that, I'm Allie, this is Wicked Encounters, and I'll see you next time. Bye!